This lens is tiny and it's super cheap, and it's pretty good. This is the brand new Viltrox 40mm f2.5 for Sony E-Mount full frame cameras, but you can still use it on APS-C cameras, and that will give you a 60mm equivalent field of view. Viltrox released this exact same lens earlier this year, but for Nikon's E-Mount, and now they're finally releasing one for Sony E-Mount, and we'll find out in this video whether you should be getting this and whether it's worth your money. And for the remainder of the talking head of this video, I'm going to be using this little Viltrox 40mm. So welcome to another video. My name is Mario, and it's great to see you back here again. And I'm still recovering from the flu. And as you can probably hear, I still sound a little bit stuffy, but I'm getting there. I'm almost better. So Viltrox has had a history of creating very compelling budget-friendly lenses like the 20mm and other lenses for about $200 and sometimes even less. And this 40mm f2.5 is no exception, since it costs only $168 US, which I have to say it's a pretty good bargain for a lens like this. To give you some perspective, the Sony 40mm f2.5 G lens will set you back almost $600 US. So there's many things that I like about this lens, but a few minor things that I quite do not like, so stay tuned to find out what those are. So this is a very basic lens with no switches or controls, but it does have a USB-C port for upgrades. And I like that the USB-C port is on the inside of the lens, inside the mount, as opposed to outside. And because that can just cause problems if you're shooting in a moist environment or dusty environment, because on some of the other lenses that I have, the USB-C port is right on the outside of the lens, like right here, instead of inside the mount. It has a filter thread size of 52mm, and if you want to get very technical, 10 lens elements in 6 groups. It has an aperture that goes from f2.5 all the way to f16. And this is something to keep in mind because it won't go all the way to f22 if you use 2 lenses that have that sort of range. One key feature about this lens is that it's compact. It's really tiny and it's very lightweight at only 180 grams. The focusing ring feels nice, and it's actually quite smooth. The minimum focusing distance of this lens is not quite as good as the Sony G lens. The minimum focusing distance of this Viltrox lens is 34 centimeters compared to the 25 centimeter of the Sony one. So once I get here, I am no longer in focus. I have to go about 34 centimeters or something. So do not expect crazy macro-like capabilities with this lens. This lens does not have stabilization, and it is not weather sealed, and it is made of plastic, but the plastic does not make it feel cheap or plasticky at all. And it also has a metal mount, which is a plus. Let's talk about autofocus. With these budget price lenses, sometimes I'm a little bit skeptical about autofocus performance, but during my test and on a trip in Honduras, on a mission trip that I just had last week, the autofocus performed quite well. That is combined with my camera's eye autofocus. So as you can see, coming in and out of the frame, the lens does a really good job at tracking me and finding me. So for general situations like this, where you don't have a very fast moving subject, the autofocus will perform quite well. However, I haven't tested this with very fast moving subjects, so that is something to keep in mind. This lens is surprisingly sharp for its price point, and I was actually quite impressed. At f2.5, you get a very sharp center with a fall off of not so sharp areas in the corners. This improves as you stop down a little bit to f3.2 or f4. And at f4, overall, pretty much the entire frame to me seems pretty sharp. Before we continue, I do like to say that if you're still watching and you haven't subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button. That is greatly appreciated, and it greatly helps with the channel, and it helps me deliver more videos like this to you. The bokeh is not bad at this price point, I have to say. It is not perfect, but it is pleasant. You get a lot of what we call bubble bokeh, which is bokeh that has an outline around those circles. And it is quite apparent in a few of these shots. As I was stopping down on my lens, I also noticed that that circle bokeh sometimes became a little bit of like a hexagon or like a 7-sided gon, whatever that's called, heptagon? I know an 8 is octagon, but what's an 7? What's that? Let me know in the comments below, I have no idea. So sometimes you get that hexagon and then that will resolve a little bit later and become rounder again. So overall the bokeh was pleasant, but sometimes I felt like it was a little bit just too busy with all those bubble bokeh. Overall though, for this price point, I wouldn't fuss too much about the bokeh. It is pleasant enough for the budget price that you're paying. Breathing compensation was better than expected. I did not really see any noticeable breathing as I was focusing between different subjects. In terms of chromatic aberration and fringing, there is a bit of this, but only when you zoom in a lot. And to the naked eye in an everyday world situations, this was not an issue and it was not distracting and actually very well controlled. I did not find any distortion with this lens. Everything seemed well, but if you do find any distortion, this can always be corrected in post. These are some sunbursts that I have with this lens, and although they seem to be very controlled, sometimes you get some ghosting artifacts that get introduced into your photos, like this one. In some instances, the sun flares look quite nice and pleasant, but in these images, I had a weird sort of flash effect, some purple fringe color ghosting situation going on from the flaring, which was not pleasant at all. So it just seems like depending on the angle of what you're shooting and where the light's coming from, you would get different types of flaring and artifacts. So that is something to keep in mind. So the question that you're waiting for, should you get this lens? So at f2.5, this is not the fastest lens. I would have preferred this lens to be f1.8 for a prime lens, but however, that would have increased the price point of this lens. And because this lens is in the budget and compact category, I can see why they started that at f2.5. And if you were to compare that with the Sony G, that's also f2.5, but that's $600. It is still a little bit faster than other prime lenses that are budget friendly, since those ones usually come at about f2.8, and definitely way better than a kit lens. So the main thing that I do not like about this lens is its performance with sun flares. But other than that, this lens was actually pretty good, all things considered. If you wanted a budget-friendly lens for a full-frame Sony E-Mount camera, this might be one to consider at just under $200. The focal length at 40mm, it's in that natural look. That means how our eyes view the world look. So it would be great for portraits and some landscapes. I'm not sure how I feel about the 40mm focal length as a prime lens. I normally tend to go for a 50mm or a 35mm, but never a 40mm. So I'm a little bit thrown away at that focal length, but maybe it's just because I'm not used to shooting at 40mm. I do have to say that for these landscapey shots, this was not as good because I felt 40 was not wide enough. But again, this is more meant to be like your natural look, the way your eyes view the world kind of focal length, so it is what it is. I'll be leaving a link in the description below for you to check this out. And as always, before you leave, here are a couple of videos you could watch next, and I'll see you there.